a very active couple of months have kept us from producing a water resources outlook, and this will be reflected in what you hear today. Jeff will address the wet weather we have been seeing. Chris will give us a look at our current weather and what to expect over the next couple of weeks, and I will address the rest of winter and an early look at our spring and summer in the January edition of the Water Resources Outlook.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Well, let's start with looking at the last 30 days of precipitation, and we see that lots of wet weather has been occurring across the southeast over the past 30 days. The heaviest amounts favoring most of Mississippi and Alabama and a good part of Georgia into the southern Appalachians, as we've been seeing storm systems sweeping northeast out of the western Gulf of Mexico. The Florida Peninsula has been on the drier side, especially South Florida. So how do these numbers compare to normal? Here are the departures from normal for the past 30 days, and we see that those areas in the Tombigbee, Black Warrior River, and the Alabama River watersheds, as well as the upper Chattahoochee and Flint River basins in Georgia, and even the far upper reaches of the Carolina River watersheds that have seen above to well above normal precipitation. This has kept water resources and reservoirs well fed and filled to the point we have seen a lot of management of these reservoirs this past month and really this past fall and winter. For the coastal areas of Florida and the Carolinas, we actually have been a bit dry, but keep in mind many of the larger coastal rivers have their headwaters in the mountains, so the stream flows remain high in those coastal areas. But the drier weather along the coast has been welcome, actually, after a wet and active tropical season there in the Carolinas. This is the departures over the last roughly 6 months, and we see how wet it has been over this period across most of the southeast. We also don't want to lose focus on the dryness down there in South Florida as well. So how have stream flows ranked from this fall through early winter? We see 2018, September through December, ranks number 1 as far as stream flow runoff for this 4-month period across the southeast as a whole. From the active tropical season to the rains this winter, the breaks from flooding have been far and few between for our office. And this data is based on looking back through 1960. So this year overtakes the 2009 El Nino fall in the winter stream flow as the highest, and also they're the third, the active tropical season of 2004, which was previously the second highest there. And with the prolonged high stream flows comes widespread flooding, and here we see the USGS flood tracker maps for the particular months. We see that flooding has only gotten worse into December as far as coverage, expanding west as we got later in the month, September and October, both showing Florence and Michael's impact. We are in the process of updating our flood climatology graphs for 2017 and 2018, but here is some preliminary data. We see one common theme in general. We have flooding in the late winter and spring, as well as secondary season in the fall with the tropical season, but collectively, over the past 2 years, we've seen flooding has been occurring almost year-round. In fact, in 2017, some of our worst flooding was in the month of May. So what about drought? We did not want to forget about it, and actually some of us would not mind a bit drier weather in the parts of the southeast, but as far as the current drought conditions, we see South Florida is the only area that has drought, with actually some severe drought conditions along the southeast coast there from near West Palm Beach to near Melbourne, Florida.
We are beginning the period with a cold front and associated precipitation moving across the southeast. The high pressure that moves in behind the front will persist into the midterm period, which takes us into next week. While this area of high pressure will keep most of the southeast dry, South Florida is expected to be well away from the high and in the vicinity of the old front. Models are showing that an upper level disturbance moving across South Florida early in the midterm period could allow for potential for additional rainfall. As we continue further into the work week, high pressure is expected to move out, allowing for another cold front to move in. The 7-day precipitation forecast shows precipitation across the area, mainly due to a progressive cold front early in the short-term period. The highest rainfall amounts are currently forecast for South Florida, which is the area that would be largely unaffected by the high pressure. The long-term outlook is primarily for below normal precipitation amounts, with high pressure expected behind the system in the midterm.
ENSO and our El Nino this year have been very interesting. While the equatorial sea surface temperatures have been above normal, the coupling with the atmosphere, in other words, having showers and thunderstorms moving across that same area, kind of that part of it, really hasn't materialized. This will likely be designated as an El Nino next month, but likely a weak one as temperatures begin to cool in the area. Going from a wet tropical fall to an above normal wet winter, flooding continues to be a big concern. However, our forecast for next month has a little bit of a different feel. First of all, if we look, we will see cooler than normal temperatures across most of the area as Arctic air has been unleashed on the eastern U.S. And that type of cold is expected to remain with us in the southeast U.S. through February. So if temperatures remain cool, what does that mean for precipitation? Well, it looks drier than what we had originally expected. Traditionally, climatologically, February tends to be a bit drier as cooler air moves into the southeast and parks itself. So we tend to have fewer and drier frontal passages. This may give us a better opportunity for winter weather. We will just have to see. The good news is we might be getting a longer break from the wet pattern we have had since fall. The one area that might receive a little bit of a benefit, as Chris kind of hinted at, is Central and South Florida, as they might receive some rain that they haven't been receiving this winter, as they've been dry since wet season. So we'll have to be watching that real closely. They could see some beneficial rain in that area. Our seasonal forecast that runs from February through April does not have as strong a cold signal, but it is still there as we approach the spring. The precipitation forecast for that time still has us in a wet pattern for the southern portion of the southeast U.S. as we transition from winter into spring. The El Nino conditions will continue out in the equatorial Pacific, and that means longer term, as we approach the end of winter, we could get wet again. Another thing to consider, as we frequently show in our flood climatology, February tends to be a little bit quieter. As we get these cold fronts through during that time of year, it tends to be a little bit drier. And then March often becomes wet, and that month is where we see the most flooding. We will have the bulk of our flood season in front of us, so continue to monitor the forecast from the Southeast RC. And the last graphic I will show is the May through July precipitation outlook. Wet weather around the periphery of our area. One thing this could show is it's hinting at an early start to the wet season in Florida to go along with the rain we're expecting over the next week or so. And for those in South Florida, this would be a blessing as they have really dried out since the end of the 2018 wet season. So the bottom line, in the short term, it looks like we'll be not quite as wet. As Jeff has shown, we've been really wet lately. We're drying out just a little bit, so it looks like we'll have a little bit cooler temperatures, but because of the cooler temperatures, we won't be drying out as much as we really would like. It'll help dry things out a little bit, but not as much as we would like. As for the long term, March looks like it could be rainy again, but again, there's still some uncertainty in that forecast. It looks to be continued a very busy season. Just because we've already started off wet, it doesn't take that much to get us to flooding and to get us into a pattern that would cause some flooding. So we'll look. It should be an interesting rest of the winter, and we plan to do our next water resources outlook on February 19th. And if you have any questions, please make sure you contact the Southeast RFC if we can help you with anything.